To make it to being a member of the Elite Four in any Pokemon region, you've got to be a pretty good trainer. Or so I've been told. And so to be champion, well, you've got to be the best, right? When I was a kid playing Pokemon Yellow and Fire Red Leaf Green, Blue was basically my platonic ideal of a strong trainer. He had diverse types on his team, he changed his strategy, he used status moves for God's sake. To a kid who had committed to pretty much just using a Venusaur, clicking Frenzy Plant, and profiting, I truly viewed Blue as a paragon of strength and strategy and cool. He had to be the strongest. After all, he beat me, didn't he? Of course, in my old age, my opinion has changed a little bit, and lately I've been wondering, was Blue even that good at all? I even went so far as to test this recently by putting Champion Blue through my BQ challenge, and I'd recommend you take a look at that video if you want a more comprehensive look at how he fares against the various Pokemon in the Kanto Pokédex. But there's more than one way to humiliate a 10-year-old, and there's more than one way to find out if Blue is worth his medal as a Pokemon trainer. Lately, I've been playing more Emerald than Fire Red or Leaf Green, mostly by chance. But spending all of this time in Hoenn got me thinking, how would Blue do in Hoenn's Pokemon League instead of Kanto? Now, these types of challenges aren't exactly rare and are something that I've thought about doing before, but there's one thing about Blue that makes this really exciting to me. Because we fight him multiple times throughout Kanto and see all kinds of permutations of his team at different points, we already pretty much have a template that we can follow for the entire game. Looking at all of the rival fights in Fire Red and Leaf Green, that leaves us with this general game plan that I'll put on the screen, but I do want to make it clear that this isn't a Nuzlocke. My Pokemon can faint and not die. As long as one of our Pokemon is left standing, we can count the battle as won, head to the Pokemon Center, and keep going. And on that same topic, I'm going to also allow us to have more than one attempt at each battle, because as far as I know, nothing in the Pokemon League rules restricts that. Of course, if we end up taking something crazy like 50 attempts to win a battle, I'll probably just call it and say this is generally impossible, but as long as it's reasonable, I'm cool giving us as many tries as it takes to get through the battle and move on. To me, the point of this challenge is more to see how difficult it would be for Blue to beat Hoenn, rather than if he can do it in one shot. And that's it. So let's stop talking about rules and actually get started on this thing, Blue. Smell ya? Now. To start off the run, we've got to pick a starter, and I decided to pick Squirtle. I don't know about you guys, but to me, Blastoise kind of feels like Blue's most appropriate partner, and I know that there's some debate about this, but that's the choice I made, and I'm going to stick with it. The cool thing about picking Squirtle is that after we add our Pidgey to the team in the early part of this game, it becomes almost identical to how it would be if we had a Mudkip and a Taillow, which in my opinion is a bit of a goated combo. So we don't really have any trouble here, and before we know it, we're already at the fight with Roxanne. Because our level cap for this fight is 15, we are able to give the Squirtle Water Gun, despite it not appearing on Blue's Route 22 team, which is great, because rocks. We have no trouble one-shotting the first and second Geodude before the Nose Pass comes out. Unfortunately, the Nose Pass isn't in range to two-shot, however, so we end up in a bit of a scramble with it before we're able to get the KO. But thankfully, we were never really in any danger here, and we walk away with our first Hoenn Gym Badge. One funny coincidence is that right outside of the gym, we're actually able to encounter Abra, which is the next Pokemon that we need to add to our team before Brawly. Blue also adds his Rattata here, so we quickly put that one on the team too. Our next level cap actually puts us in range to evolve all of our Pokemon, but I made the decision that, unlike with movesets, I would at least keep the evolutions consistent with what Blue had. And since our Brawly fight will be based on Blue's Cerulean City team, we have to keep the Abra, Squirtle, and Rattata in their first forms for this fight. But at least we can get Pidgeotto, who's going to be our main attacker in this gym anyway. Just as a Taillow or a Beautifly would have been in this scenario, Pidgeotto with Stab Gust is more than enough to handle Brawly, and we quickly nab our second badge in the Hoenn League. And now we can evolve our Pokemon, upgrading to Wartortle, Kadabra, and Raticate. Unfortunately, Blue doesn't get any more encounters prior to his SS Hand team, which is the one that we're going to have to use against Wattson. And I'm starting to get a little bit worried thinking about that one. But we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. First, we've got to head to Slateport and deal with a few Team Aqua shenanigans. It's also at this point that I'm reminded just how dead easy it is to make progress with Eradicate. We were even able to sweep the dreaded May fight without any issues whatsoever. But I guess this makes sense for Blue. After all, I can't imagine him settling for anything less than a top-rate rat. Once we get to Mauville, we graciously take the time to embarrass Wally and his Ralts with our Kadabra, before hyperfanging our way through every trainer in a 3-mile radius as preparation for our fight with Wattson. I mentioned it before, but this fight is going to be hard, especially with this team and these movesets. Terrifyingly, 2 out of our 4 team members are weak to electric, and water gun is somehow our best option against the magneton, so yeah, I'm not expecting to win this on our first try, but let's see how it goes. At first, we started with Raticate under the assumption that it wouldn't work very well against the magneton, and so it would be better placed at the start of the fight. But this didn't work very well due to difficulties with the Raticate getting paralyzed and constantly missing Hyper Fang despite its supposed 90% accuracy. Because of this, we quickly decided to start with Kadabra instead in order to KO the Voltorb and Electrike as quickly as possible. After which we would switch over to Raticate and try to use Tail Whip and Hyper Fang to take out the magneton. Funny how quickly things can change, huh? We realized early on here that self-destruct was a huge risk when starting with the Kadabra, but because the computer didn't do it every time, we just tried to work around it. On attempt 6, we made it to the Manectric, but it was too difficult to KO it before fainting ourselves. As we kept going, we just continued to either lose the Kadabra or the Raticate too early, and end up unable to finish with our overall more vulnerable reserve forces. It was at this point that I really began to consider restarting with the Charmander team to make this easier, but luckily I'm no coward, so I decided to rethink the strategy one more time. Given that with our current technique, I don't even really end up getting to use the Wartortle or the Pidgeotto, I switch it up and decide to start the battle with them to do as much damage as possible and also keep the main 2 fresh for when the Magneton and Manectric eventually come out. Somewhere along the way here, I decided to try Pidgeotto's Whirlwind at the start to maybe force out one of the more difficult Pokemon and get some damage on it. And the first time I try it, Wattson sends out his Manectric. After the Pidgeotto dies, I send in Raticate and I'm able to get the KO with the Hyper Fang. So this seems like the new strategy to focus on, even if we need to get some data first. Voltorb comes out next, and we switch to Wartortle to try and set up a situation of Kadabra versus Magneton with Raticate on standby for the win. This doesn't work, but it seems like a viable line to try. So we go at it like this for a while, and eventually we get the run where the Whirlwind brings out Magneton. At this point, rather than go for a minuscule amount of damage, I instead decide to send Pidgeotto's final message, and hit a sand attack to maybe make this Titan easier to knock out, or at the very least prevent us from getting paralyzed every time. This will be an important decision later on, but for now we don't know how it's going to work, so we just try it and lose a bunch because we can't hit through paralysis. On attempt number 27 though, we get our first run where we end up with a pretty clean Kadabra versus Magneton, as it has no status effect and 43 HP remaining. The Kadabra faints, but with luck, things could have been different. So maybe it's worth banging our head against this wall just a little while longer. And I bet you thought there'd be a long montage here, didn't you, you little rascal? But I want to stop for a second and show you how on attempt 29, Wattson brings out the Magneton with Whirlwind, and I make the inspired choice to go into Kadabra first instead of Raticate. I'm like a neural net processor, a learning computer. Sure, I ultimately lose to the Manectric anyways, but at least I'm trying something new. Then, on attempt 30. 32, here we go. Alright, sand attack. Pidgeotto sends his regards.
It's literally just there, so Sonic Boom whiffs.
That's
he doesn't
Pidgeotto sends his regards.
Listen, this is like, hey,
you!
Yes!
The crit!
Pidgeotto sends his regards!
Okay, here we go.
Okay.
Got paralyzed.
It's fine. Kill him.
Just gonna howl. Double Hyper Fang.
Kill him.
Do it now!
Yes!
Let's go! So that was tough, and it took a while. Time for my post-match analysis, thoughts, and things I learned. You will lose a turn to paralysis at least 60% of the time. A 90% accurate move will miss at least 50% of the time. And your opponent will hit themselves 10% of the time, while you hit yourself in confusion 75% of the time. Don't listen to what they tell you, they're lying. Moving on. Ironically, despite Raticate being the only one to actually survive that fight, this is its last showing on the team, due to Red knocking it out on the SSN and setting it to an early grave. Good night, sweet angel. In exchange for Raticate though, we do finally get to add Execute and Growlithe to the team, although we're not allowed to evolve them, or give them better movesets. To be fair though, Execute actually has a pretty good set right now, but I know a worse one awaits somewhere on the horizon. Before we can move on to Flannery, we do have to head to Meteor Falls and then deal with Team Magma and Mount Chimney though. Maxie's there doing something stupid, but we beat him without any trouble thanks to Kadabra and War Turtle, and are ready for the next gym, which will hopefully be easier than Wattson. We start with War Turtle and one-shot the Numel with a crit, at which point the Slugma comes out. It survives our first water gun and hits us with Smog, but we avoid the poison and are able to take it out while also burning one of her heals. The incoming Camerupt decides to try a more sultry strategy, attracting War Turtle, and we subsequently lose 2 turns to War Turtle's Hear Me Out, but ultimately we take her down. War Turtle does immediately try to go on the rebound with Torkoal, but she doesn't have the same je ne sais quoi, and we hit anyway. Torkoal hits a Sunny Day, and so we can't KO and lose War Turtle in return. We send in the eggs next to hit a Hypnosis and a Leech Seed, but I guess the Torkoal rolled to the side or something because we miss. I switch over to Kadabra instead, just as the Torkoal wakes up, and it hits a stupid crit to take it out, so I bring the eggs back out just for Hypnosis to miss and for us to lose them anyway. Pidgeotto and Growlithe both do their best to carry us through after this tragic loss, but Overheat still does a ton of damage, and Growlithe is as susceptible to Torkoal's charm as War Turtle was, so we ultimately lose our first attempt. Our second attempt, on the other hand, is so much better that I'm not even going to bother with the play-by-play. We start with Kadabra and take out the Numel and Slugma with Confusion, also doing enough damage on the Camerupt that War Turtle faints it. Torkoal comes out and we get damage with War Turtle before he goes down too, having learned nothing from his past experiences. And we finish the job with the eggs through Hypnosis, Leech Seed, and Confusion.
Well, yeah, it's just that easy. I don't think you're even mad when you win. Well, yeah.
Now that we're done with Flannery, we can pretty much go straight to the fight with Norman, which we have to do with no Arcanine, no Executor, no Alakazam, and worst of all, no Hypnosis, because for some reason Blue decided to get rid of it for Poison Powder. And if there's one thing I learned through playing Emerald Sea Glass, it's that you don't forget to never poison Norman's Pokemon.
Facade!
With that in mind, let's start the fight. We're starting this one with Pidgeotto, and though it takes everything that we have, we are able to knock out the Spinda and burn one of Norman's Hyper Potions, but we predictably faint to the Vigoroth immediately afterwards. We send in the Kadabra next, setting up a Reflect before sending as many Confusions as it takes. We almost lose the Kadabra here, but are thankfully able to KO the Vigoroth and draw out Norman's Slacking. Because I know the Kadabra is fainting here, I actually hit a Future Sight that will hopefully help later, before sending out the Execute. We drop a Leech Seed just as our Reflect wears off, and then move on to Confusion. And when Kadabra's Future Sight comes in, although it doesn't do much, it does get the Slacking low enough to burn its Citrus Berry, just before our eggs fall asleep to Slacking's Yawn. While Slacking loafs around, we switch out War Turtle, who, in the process of getting yawned, proves once and for all that I can't even count to 2. We keep War Turtle out and hit Water Gun, but it does absolutely nothing, and then to make things worse, Norman heals up his damn dirty ape! But thanks to the effects of Leech Seed, I know that we pretty much have this one in the bag, so it's basically just a matter of waiting for the seeds to suck Slacking's life force and hand us the KO. The Linoon does manage to KO War Turtle in revenge, but not before we get Linoon's health low enough to let Growlithe secure the victory with Flame Wheel. With Norman, wait, would his last name be Oak in this situation? Defeated, we head toward the Weather Institute and our next battle in Fortree City. The Institute is no problem for our bird, and after saving the scientists, we release their cast form into the local environment to figure its own self out. The rival fight here is also easy, and after clearing out the Kecleon, we're already in position to fight Winona, which I'm anticipating is going to be terrifying thanks to the fact that we're stuck with this Execute at Growlithe until the Elite Four. But all we can do is try. We start with our old standby, Pidgeotto, which I realize at this point is kind of funny because that's what Blue always does too, but I guess great minds think alike. Taking out the Swablu is simple enough, although we do have to tank a crit Aerial Ace to do it. She brings out Tropius next, and given Wing Attack does a crazy amount of damage, we're able to two-shot that as well. Pelipper is next, and we're able to get it down to half health before losing Pidgeotto, at which point we move into War Turtle, who I decide to have stack Withdraw until its skin is as strong as steel. Why, you ask? No reason. This allows us to somehow survive until we KO the Pelipper with Bite. Thanks to our million withdraws, we're also able to tank a hit from Skarmory and get it down to half before War Turtle goes down, but Growlithe is plenty strong enough to KO the Skarmory in return. When the Altaria arrives, it sees our Fire type and immediately goes for an Earthquake, but our Growlithe lives and tosses out a free Leer as a result. That Leer unfortunately ends up doing nothing because we only have Kadabra and Execute left, but At least I'm trying, okay? Speaking of the eggs, they are able to survive an aerial ace and drop leech seeds before they die to a crit, but once Kadabra comes out, despite our best efforts, we lose because all we can use is Confusion instead of Psychic. Moving on to attempt 2, we KO the Swablu with Wing Attack, same as before, but because we were put under Perish Song, we have to switch over to Growlithe to knock out the Tropius. We bring Pidge back in against Pelipper, but Confusion's 90% self-hit rate gets rid of it, and we instead have to finish the Pelipper with War Turtle. War Turtle is also surprisingly able to KO Skarmory with Water Gun, and Altaria comes out. Once we've lost War Turtle and brought out the eggs, we get Leech Seed and Paralysis online, and our remaining team gives it absolutely everything they've got, but the Altaria clings to life, and we lose the second attempt in such a tragic way. So we start attempt 3. And things go pretty much the same up to the execute. But then...
Oh my god.
Okay. Alright, I mean, he's dead, but...
Oh, let's go.
Oh, the Paralyze actually saved us.
And he's confused?
Oh my god.
This absolutely great sequence allows us to send in Kadabra and end Altaria and Winona with Confusion. Winning this fight feels good, because I think it's about time status effects start helping us instead of our opponents. Before we can do the next gym, we do have to handle some Aqua stuff at Mount Pyre in the hideout, but these are pretty simple. And once we're done, we put on our special swimsuit and head over to Moss Deep City. Our next fight is against Tate and Liza, in preparation for whom we update our team to be based off of Blue's Silphco iteration. Because of this, we can finally evolve some of our Pokemon, gaining Pidgeot, Blastoise, and Alakazam. Also, because our current level cap is 42, we're able to look ahead at Blue's later Route 22 movesets and infer that he lets his Alakazam learn Psychic at level 36. This gives us access to both Calm Mind and Psychic, which is a fine reward for all of the time we've spent putting up with just Confusion. But as we prepare for Tate and Liza, we also learn the terrible news that between Silphco and Route 22, Blue gets rid of both Confusion and Leech Seed in exchange for Sleep Powder and Solar Beam. This puts us in the disastrous situation of having to get rid of one of those former moves when Execute learns Sleep Powder at level 37, and we decide to get rid of Confusion rather than Leech Seed, meaning our eggs are purely for stun and burn at this point. But maybe that'll help, I don't know. This is one of those fights that's so difficult that you just have to send it and do what you can. To start off, we go in with Alakazam and Blastoise, setting up Calm Mind and tossing a Water Gun at the Claydol. Not to be outdone, Tate and Liza set up their own Calm Mind on Xatu, and Claydol does massive EQ damage, particularly to Alakazam. As a result, I know that I have to focus the Claydol and take it out with Psychic and Water Gun, though this gives the Xatu a chance to hit its second Calm Mind. As the Soul Rock comes in, we decide to focus that instead of the Xatu for now, but Psychic and Water Gun fall frustratingly short, giving the Xatu a chance to take out our Alakazam and push us into Pidgeot. Soul Rock sets up a sunny day, but a well-timed Citrus Berry gives us a chance to avoid the Potion Heal and knock it out with a crit Water Gun. Meanwhile though, the buffed up Xatu KOs our Pidgeot and we're forced to bring in Growlithe, and Bite does very little damage to the Xatu, but does give us a flinch. Given that, I go for Takedown next, but this also does surprisingly little, so we lose the Growlithe and bring out the dozen. I wanted to set up Leech Seed and see if we could get anything going, but it wasn't to be, and we end up with our first loss, but at least we learned some things. On our second try, we decide to start with the Pidgeot because it can Whirlwind the Xatu and mitigate the power of Calm Mind, while also avoiding Claydol's EQ. And to be honest, I don't know why we didn't do this the first time. We start off with a Feather Dance on Claydol to lower EQ's damage, and then are lucky enough to hit a huge crit Water Gun on it that knocks it to 1/3 health. Unfortunately, Claydol gets its own crit in return and does essentially the same thing to Blastoise, but we get the last laugh, knocking Claydol down with Water Gun before losing Blastoise to a crit Psychic. But we're at least able to cleanly switch into eggs and Whirlwind out the Xatu to wipe its Calm Mind buff. At this point, we decide to commit to switching the Lunatone and Xatu in and out so long as they use Calm Mind. So we go for a Leech Seed on Soul Rock with the eggs, but of course it ends up avoiding it, so we have to do it again on the next turn. After this, Lunatone sets up Light Screen and Soul Rock kills our Execute with a boosted Flamethrower, but we're just happy to have gotten a Leech Seed off. Now that we're in a good position for it, we start setting up Calm Minds on the Alakazam while focusing the Lunatone with Pidgeot. Given its knowledge of Calm Mind makes it a bigger threat, and its partner serves us better as a health battery for our strongest warrior anyway. Another lucky thing that happens here is that Solrock decides to hit Pidgeot and Lunatone misses a Hypnosis, so we go for a second Calm Mind on Alakazam to buff it up. The Sun and Moon team up to take out Pidgeot, and we're forced to bring in Growlithe, who promptly faints and leaves us with only our Alakazam. At this point, seeing how the flamethrower damage is so minimal that we can just heal it off with Leech Seed, I decided to begin boosting with Calm Mind again, mostly because we only have 6 Psychic PP remaining and I don't want to risk running out. I get 2 more off like this before a missed Hypnosis makes me decide to strike at the Lunatone again. It doesn't kill, but Tate Liza do heal our favorite health pack, which inspires me to go for yet another Calm Mind. We do end up getting burned by the Solrock's flamethrower here, which essentially negates our Leech Seed healing, but we're now strong enough to go all in on the attack, feinting the Lunatone and then doing the same thing to the Xatu as soon as it comes back in. Solrock tries to Hail Mary a Solar Beam at the end, but by now we're too strong for it to do anything, and after a final big sip from what has essentially become a rejuvenating beverage at this point, we mercifully take it out. And I have to admit, I was a little sad to see it go. I've almost become attached to the hunk of rock. But it's time to leave it behind and say hello to our own hunk of rock, Rhyhorn, who we can finally add to the team. And even though it's not that good, it is nice to have our full roster, despite the fact that 3 of them are still confusingly unevolved. Leading up to the 8th gym, we have a few things to take care of before we're ready. We fight alongside our slightly higher def friend Steven in the Space Center, chase Maxie down to beat him to a pulp, chase Archie down to beat him to a pulp, unleash the gods of this world upon an unsuspecting populace, get Rayquaza to break up that fight, and then we're ready. Once again, we're starting with Pidgeot, and we open up with a nice crit on Love Disc for the KO, before hitting a second crit on Celio before taking that out too. The bird does more than I would have thought against the Kingdra before fainting, but it and our Executive go down really quickly to Ice Beam, so I decide to bring in Alakazam. Psychic crits and knocks out the Kingdra, but when the Crawdaunt comes in, I have to switch over to Blastoise and just keep going for Bite despite its weakness until we get the KO. Juan sends out the Whiscash next, but without much to use against it, Blastoise eventually goes down to a crit and passes the buck over to Alakazam, who shocks us all by hitting a Psychic that doesn't seal the deal and subsequently feigning to a crit from the Whiscash. I send in Rhyhorn for its first major fight, and what do you think happened? We still have Growlithe at this point, and using Takedown, we actually get into a position where a crit would end the fight with a win, but we don't get so lucky, and we have to run it back. On the second attempt, thankfully, we have much more average luck, and we're able to close out the fight and earn our place as a Hoenn Elite Four contender. The most exciting thing about beating the last gym is that we can now evolve all of our Pokemon. Well, technically Blue probably did this when he was in Victory Road, but I'm not waiting anymore. Entering Victory Road, right away we have to bully Wally one last time, and I just continuously roar out his Altaria to bring out everything that's weak to Flamethrower, which is just a comical situation to me. Finally having an Arcanine. This is what we've been waiting for. Going into the Elite Four, it's nice not having to think about our team composition for once, because somebody else has already done it for us. So after editing our movesets and giving Blastoise a Citrus Berry, whoa look, our first held item, it's time to head in. But first, one thing. I do have a small rule update to make. I know that I said at the beginning that we're not trying to make this a Nuzlocke or anything, and that fainting and reviving is fine, but at the end of the game here, I did start feeling the itch for some random, inadvisable difficulty spike, and this impulse could not be stopped. So for the Elite Four, I'm going to do things a little different. If a Pokemon faints during one of my Elite Four fights, but I still win the battle, that Pokemon will be out of commission for the rest of the Elite Four. But if all of the Pokemon that entered a fight with me faint, we'll get to try that fight again. This is admittedly kind of an arbitrary decision, but this is all for challenge and fun anyway, so I think it's alright. Besides, we can just pretend that the Hoenn League has some rule against revives or something. Anyway, let's get this started. I'm officially on the record as saying that Sidney is basically the Bruno of Hoenn, and true to that, this fight isn't exactly difficult. But I did end up getting to use basically my entire team to get it done. I started with Pidgeot and whirlwinded the Mighty Yenna out for Crawdaunt, and switched Blastoise in because, as we know from Juan, he has Crawdaunt Killer printed on his resume. We go back into Pidgeot for the Cacturn and use it for a bit on the Absol, but ultimately decide to pivot over to the Rhydon for its tankiness, knocking out the Absol and Mighty Yenna, and then pulling in Arcanine to finish off the Shiftry. You know, I didn't expect to lose anything there, but it's nice to just get some confirmation that Sidney really ain't. Phoebe is up next, and I start with Pidgeot once again, because it's honestly our most expendable member at this point. Aerial Ace does about a third to the Dusclops, and when we get cursed, I decide to switch over to the Arcanine while she heals, and this gives us a chance to take out the Dusclops with 2 turns of Bite. The second Dusclops, weirdly enough, is way stronger defensively, and it also knows Earthquake, but we're able to take this one out too, even if we have to tank 2 Earthquakes to do it. When Bayonet comes in, we switch over to Blastoise, and are happy to see the Bite does the perfect amount of damage for a 2-shot. But Because Bayonet uses Grudge, we do sadly have to do this at the cost of all of our bite PP. The second Bayonet is a little scary because it knows Thunderbolt, but after setting up Rain Dance, we don't stay in the danger zone long enough for that to matter, instead just taking it and the following Sableye down and ending the fight with no losses. Moving into the Glacia fight, this is the first one where I'm a little nervous about how we're going to do, mostly because our team is pretty weak to Ice and Water. Because of this, I start with the Alakazam against Tresilio, and Psychic does a good amount of damage. We force a heal and take some hail damage, but are able to feint the Celio with Psychic before doing the same thing to Glalie. The second Glalie comes out and promptly knocks out the Alakazam with Shadow Ball. Yeah, probably should have switched there. But a quick Flamethrower from Arcanine makes up for our mistake. When Glacia brings in Walrein, I get scared and bring an Exeggutor to tank a Surf, and get even more terrified when the Walrus turns out to be faster than our eggs and crits an Ice Beam. For this reason, I switch it to Pidgeot, fully planning for it to die, which it does. I send in Blastoise next and use Bite, hoping for a sort of Crawdaunt situation, but this strategy does very little other than eat its Citrus Berry and give us the occasional flinch. We do get the Walrein close to death, but end up paralyzed and ultimately faint to an insulting use of Surf, after which we bring our Arcanine to die in solidarity. This leaves us with only Rhydon, who Eric is weirdly confident in.
Hang on, the Rhydon can still do this.
With what?
Behold, Earthquake. Oh.
Anyway, that one was obviously fraught from the beginning, so we quickly try to run it back, starting with the Exeggutor over the Alakazam. But unluckily for us, Egg Bomb misses a lot, and we end up switching into Zam anyway to finish Celio off. However, I do still learn from my mistakes by switching it to Arcanine on the Glalie and taking it out with Flamethrower. Glacia brings out her Walrein, and after tanking a Surf, I quickly roar it out, KO the second Glalie, and then switch into our chompy Blastoise to work on the Walrein. We end up paralyzed here, and rather than sack the Blastoise, I bring in the Pidgeot to send its final regards and offer the chance of a switch into the Rhydon. My thinking here was that if the Rhydon was somehow speed-tied with the Walrein, then I could kill it with Earthquake. But this was probably a foolish call, and we lose him as well. Good for us though that this lets us bring in the Alakazam, who is able to take out both the Walrein and the final Celio with Psychic, earning us a victory on Glacia and sealing our fate in regards to the team moving forward. I'm not gonna lie and say that it doesn't hurt to lose the Pidgeot and Rhydon here, but to be honest, if we were gonna lose anyone, they were the ones to go. Pidgeot is of course a bigger loss due to Sand Attack, but I still think we can make do against Drake. For this fight, we begin with Alakazam, and after waiting out Protect, we one-shot the Shelgon with Psychic. Drake brings in the Flygon as a follow-up, and we decide to set up a Reflect for survivability, which, after watching EQ do less than half of our HP, looks to be an essential step in allowing us to two-shot the Flygon while keeping Alakazam online. Rather than lose our MVP here, we switch Alakazam out on the Salamence and bring in Blastoise to tank a Dragon Claw, after which we set up Rain and try for Hydro Pump. This only does about a third of Salamence's HP, but after a miraculous crit on our second Hydro Pump, we do get the KO. When the Altaria appears, we go for a Hydro Pump again, and it does a respectable amount of damage before Blastoise drops. We bring out Arcanine for the Intimidate attack drop, and then hit a disappointing Extreme Speed that not only doesn't KO, but also allows Altaria to hit Dragon Dance while Drake heals it up. We have no choice but to roar the Altaria out to mitigate its stat increase, and then switch to Eggs to face off against the Kingdra. Although the Kingdra also rips a Dragon Dance, we put it to sleep and then try out Egg Bomb, which seems like it could feint it in 3, but of course we don't hit the range. Here, I wasn't sure if Drake was going to heal, and so I risked another Egg Bomb, which was probably a mistake because our next two Sleep Powders miss, and we go down to a crit Body Slam, because of course we do. Arcanine isn't able to knock the Kingdra out with Extreme Speed, so we end up losing it and our Alakazam to close out Attempt 1 on Drake. Now, I'm not going to show you all of this, but we ended up doing this fight 10 more times while following roughly the same strategy. And I did this because I really think we had the right idea, we just got a little unlucky. 10 times. Now after the 6th attempt, I did start considering just reviving our fallen teammates, because there's no one saying we can't except ourselves, but we ultimately stayed strong and stuck to our pointless, self-inflicted rule set. And, through doing so many attempts, we were able to realize that the Citrus Berry is absolutely necessary on the Blastoise to take out Salamence, and that Sleep Powder and Egg Bomb, despite having 75 accuracy, will miss every time, which is at least worth something. And by the 12th fight, we pretty much had the opening sequence down to a science, so forgive me if the following description sounds like a bulleted list, but that's honestly how doing this fight felt in the moment. So while Shelgon protects, Alakazam reflects. Then we KO Shelgon with 1 Psychic. Flygon comes in, we hit it with Psychic, Survivor Reflect Reduced Earthquake, and KO it with the 2nd Psychic. We then switch to Blastoise on Salamence, and this is where chance starts to take over. As the Salamence hits a crit on Crunch and we burn our Citrus Berry early, we try to stick to the script and hit our Hydro Pumps, but we're now in a situation where we need to hope for a low damage range on Dragon Claw to be able to survive and take Salamence out. And then suddenly Disaster strikes us instead and we miss Hydro Pump. However, we immediately get a turn of luck on the next turn as Blastoise gets its own rain-boosted crit Hydro Pump and takes out the Salamence in 1 hit, leaving us in an advantageous spot as the Altaria comes in. Blastoise hits its Hydro Pump on Altaria before fainting, serving its true purpose, and we switch into Alakazam to take advantage of its lower health and KO it with Psychic to preempt any Dragon Dancing. When Kingdra comes in, we switch over to Eggs, put Kingdra to sleep, hit 2 Egg Bombs, and then finally a Giga Drain for the KO. And so we've made it to Wallace. But we only have 3 Pokemon remaining to do it with. Truthfully, at this point, our impromptu rule change is looking sillier and sillier, but even so, we commit to it and go in, hoping that the golden path to victory exists, and that somehow we'll be able to find it. We lead with Exeggutor, hitting Sleep Powder on the Wailord and then KOing it with 2 Egg Bombs and a Giga Drain. Tentacruel comes out and we put it to sleep too, but only after taking massive damage to Sludge Bomb. Although we try to take it out while it's asleep, it wakes back up and quickly Sludge Bombs Exeggutor to death, forcing us to bring in Alakazam and finish it off. Ludicolo faints to 2 Psychics, which is great to see even if the possibility of a double team induced miss looms large over our heads. Whiscash comes in next and Psychic does about half, but Wallace has it use Amnesia, which lets it stay alive long enough to take most of our health with Hyper Beam before we're able to take it out. This places us in the unfortunate predicament of having to sack Alakazam, but we at least take out half of Gyarados' HP on the way. Of course, with only Arcanine left at this point and the Milotic waiting in the rafters for us, it's probably not a surprise that we're not able to close this one out on our first attempt. After this first loss to Wallace, we end up in a situation similar to Drake, where we just have to keep testing it out until we can figure the perfect strategy. So rather than a complete play-by-play of those fights, I'm just going to talk about the changes we made incrementally, fight by fight, as that strategy took shape. On our second fight, we get a good look at how much damage Giga Drain can do, and decide to go for 2 Egg Bombs and 1 Giga Drain to get the KO, rather than all Egg Bomb. We also begin switching out to Alakazam on the Tentacruel instead of keeping Eggs in, but we lose Alakazam to Poison and can't beat the Ludicolo, so we reset. On attempt 3, we put the Tentacruel to sleep and tank Poison with Eggs before switching over to Alakazam and sticking with it the entire fight. We lose Alakazam to the Whiscash and go to Eggs, who faint to Ice Beam and Toxic from Milotic before Arcanine faints too. With attempt 4, we try starting with Alakazam, who kills Wailord but faints to Tentacruel Sludge Bomb, leaving the rest of the team in a bad spot. On attempt 5, we realize that Eggs and the dog are 1 level below cap, so we level everybody up to the proper level. Going back to starting with Eggs, we get Sludge Bombed and poisoned when trying to get Tentacruel to sleep. This run ends in a loss. Attempt 6, we decide that Exeggutor getting poisoned is a death sentence, but we still plan to keep Eggs in, so for now we're just hoping that the Tentacruel uses Sludge Bomb and doesn't poison before we put it to sleep and switch to Alakazam. On this attempt, a combo of Leech Seed and Double Team from the Ludicolo proves insurmountable, and we have to take the loss. For attempt 7, we begin to commit to bringing in Arcanine when we get to the Whiscash, as it cuts its attack and makes Earthquake do less. This fight still ends in a loss though, when Whiscash crits Alakazam through Reflect. During attempt 8, an early wake from sleep and a blizzard on Eggs makes it so that we can't keep them out at all against Tentacruel, and we experiment with switching Arcanine in. The Arcanine loses, but it sets Tentacruel up to be a one-shot for Alakazam. Because Arcanine is not very useful in this fight, and using him on Tentacruel prevents Eggs from getting poisoned, this decision brought on by random chance actually seems like a good strategy to follow. We lose this fight due to a Sleep Powder miss on Milotic, but we have a new idea, so it was a good one. Attempt 9 has us realize that we only need 1 Egg Bomb and 1 Giga Drain to KO Wailord, which minimizes the risk of both early Wake Up and an Egg Bomb miss. We try out the Arcanine on Tentacruel strat and it works like a charm, so we're going to keep doing that. After two-shotting the Ludicolo, we also decide that it's worth switching to Eggs on Whiscash rather than try with Alakazam, as they can tank EQ, hit a Sleep Powder, and then one-shot with Giga Drain to regain their health. We lose on Milotic due to a crit, but this seems like the best strategy we have so far to tackle his first 4 Pokemon. With attempt 10, the strategy we've built so far works perfectly up to Milotic, but it crits Ice Beam again. This inspires Eric with the idea to use a sleep turn on Whiscash to set up Light Screen and make Executor tankier once the Milotic comes in. We decide to try that on attempt 11. So, attempt 11 comes and we try it out, setting up Light Screen. This allows us to survive the Ice Beam with plenty of HP, but we get frozen. But then we defrost and hit Sleep Powder anyway. We only have 2 Giga Drains left and they don't kill, but this seems like a range. For attempt 12, we decide to set up a Light Screen on Sleeping Wailord 2 to maybe keep Arcanine alive longer versus Tentacruel. Although this doesn't allow the Arcanine to live or anything, it does let it get Tentacruel's HP low enough that Wallace burns a full restore, which is probably worth it in the long run. Bad luck still messes us up on Milotic, but the strategy is starting to feel super possible. Starting with attempt 13, we get 4 resets in a row thanks to bad luck, but it doesn't deter us. And to be honest with you, I kind of view these 4 consecutive losses as us burning our bad luck so that things in this next run can go just as they need to. And here it is, the magic attempt where it all comes together. Sleep Powder on Wailord, 1 Egg Bomb, set up Light Screen, beat Wailord with Giga Drain, switch to Arcanine, deal damage to Tentacruel and sacrifice it so that Alakazam can come in to 2-shot with Psychic, double Psychic to take out Ludicolo, switch to Executor on Whiscash, Sleep Powder, Light Screen, Giga Drain to take it out. Milotic comes in and hits Toxic, but we put it to sleep. Giga Drain crit almost knocks it out, but because it doesn't, Wallace heals and we use the chance to load another Sleep Powder in the chamber. Although we take damage to Toxic, we get 2 good damage rolls on Giga Drain, and finally get a run with the Milotic out of the picture, leaving only the Gyarados. Putting the Gyarados to sleep and getting some nominal damage with Egg Bomb, we wait for the eggs to faint to poison and send out Alakazam. Now all we need is for the Gyarados to stay asleep for 2 turns, so that we can KO with Psychic.
I can't believe it. We found the line.
We found the line.
We found the line.
At the beginning of this run, we had a question. Can Blue become the champion of Hoenn using his canonical Kanto team? The answer, as it turns out, is yes, but at a cost and with a lot of tries. Of course, it probably would have been a lot easier for Blue to become champion of Hoenn if we allowed him to use revives, but I don't regret the decision to up the challenge in the slightest. Even with a reduced team, I think Wattson was a harder fight than Wallace, and the higher difficulty and team restrictions made things a little more strategic and variable right up to the end. Honestly, thinking about it now, this really was one of the most fun Pokemon Challenge runs I've done in quite a while. I really hope you guys enjoyed it too, and if you want to see any other videos like this, just let me know in the comments. I'd also love it if you would like the video and subscribe, because I, like Blue, really am just seeking validation deep down. But anyway, that's all from me, so thank you so much for watching, have a nice day, and as always, smell you later.